Denise Carter had been on her feet for 12 straight hours. And that was the life of a night shift nurse at Memphis General Hospital. Broken bones, crying children, exhausted parents, and the occasional miracle that reminded her why she chose this job in the first place. By the time 6 in the morning rolled around, her body was running on nothing but willpower and the promise of her favorite vanilla latte. She clocked out, grabbed her bag from her locker, and stepped into the cool morning air. The sun was just starting to peek over the buildings downtown, painting everything in shades of orange and pink. Most people were still in their beds, but Denise loved this time of day. The city was quiet, peaceful. It felt like the world belonged only to her. And the few early risers scattered along the sidewalks. The coffee shop was 3 blocks from the hospital. She had been going there for almost 2 years now, ever since she transferred from a smaller clinic on the outskirts of town. The owner, a kind older woman named Miss Greta, knew her order by heart. Denise didn't even have to say anything when she walked through the door. Miss Greta would just smile, nod, and start making the vanilla latte before Denise reached the counter. This morning was no different. Denise pushed open the glass door, heard the familiar chime of the bell above her head, and felt the warmth of the shop wrap around her like a blanket. The smell of fresh coffee and baked goods filled her lungs. She closed her eyes for just a second and let herself breathe. "Long night?" Miss Greta asked from behind the counter. Denise smiled tiredly. "You have no idea. We had a little boy come in around midnight. Fell off his bike and broke his arm in 2 places. Poor thing was so scared. But he was brave. Didn't cry once while we set the bone." Miss Greta shook her head with sympathy. "Kids are tougher than we give them credit for. Here, sit down. I'll bring your coffee to you." Denise thanked her and found her usual spot by the window. She liked watching the street wake up. The delivery trucks making their rounds. The joggers in their bright sneakers. The stray cat that lived behind the bakery next door, always hunting for scraps. These small moments of stillness were precious to her. They reminded her that life wasn't just about the chaos inside the hospital. There was beauty out here, too, if you knew where to look. Miss Greta brought over the latte, and Denise wrapped her hands around the warm cup. She took a sip and felt the tension in her shoulders begin to melt away. For the next few minutes, she didn't think about anything. She just sat there, quiet and content, letting the world go by. But peace, as Denise had learned many times in her 34 years, never lasted forever. The sound came first. A deep rumbling that grew louder and louder until it drowned out everything else. Motorcycles, a whole group of them, by the sound of it. Denise glanced out the window and saw them coming down the street. There were maybe 8 or 9 of them, all riding in a loose formation. Their engines roared like thunder, and the few pedestrians on the sidewalk stopped to watch them pass. Denise didn't pay them much attention. She wasn't the type to get excited about motorcycles. She turned back to her coffee and took another sip, but then something unusual happened. One of the bikers broke away from the group. Instead of continuing down the street with the others, he pulled his motorcycle onto the sidewalk right in front of the coffee shop. The tires scraped against the concrete, and he killed the engine with an angry twist of his wrist. Denise watched him through the window. He was a big man, probably in his early 40s, with a shaved head and a leather jacket that had seen better days. He yanked off his helmet and immediately pulled out his phone, pressing it to his ear. Even through the glass, Denise could see he was upset. His face was red and he was pacing back and forth on the sidewalk, shouting into the phone. She couldn't hear what he was saying, but his body language told her everything she needed to know. This was a man on the edge. Something had gone wrong in his life, and he was taking it out on whoever was on the other end of that call. Denise finished her latte and decided it was time to head home. She had a hot shower and a soft bed waiting for her, and she wasn't about to let some angry stranger ruin her morning. She stood up, waved goodbye to Miss Greta, and stepped outside. The biker was still there, still shouting. His motorcycle was parked right in the middle of the sidewalk, blocking the path. An elderly woman with a walker had stopped a few feet away, unsure of how to get around. A young mother pushing a stroller had crossed to the other side of the street to avoid him entirely. Denise watched for a moment, hoping he would move on his own. But he didn't. He just kept pacing and yelling, completely oblivious to the people around him. She took a breath and made a decision. She was tired, yes, but she wasn't the kind of person who could just walk away when someone needed help. The elderly woman looked confused and a little frightened. Denise couldn't leave her standing there. She approached the biker slowly, keeping her voice calm and polite. "Excuse me, sir. I'm sorry to interrupt, but your bike is blocking the sidewalk. Would you mind moving it so people can get through?" He stopped pacing. For a second, he just stared at her like he couldn't believe someone had actually spoken to him. His eyes were bloodshot, and up close, Denise could see the dark circles beneath them. This was a man who hadn't slept in days. "What did you say to me?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. Denise kept her composure. She had dealt with angry patients before. She knew how to stay calm under pressure. "I said your bike is blocking the sidewalk. That lady over there is trying to get through. If you could just move it a few feet, that would really help." She gestured toward the elderly woman, hoping he would see reason. Hoping he would realize that this wasn't about him. It was just a simple request, nothing more, but something inside him snapped. He didn't say another word. He didn't give any warning. He just raised his hand and brought it down hard across Denise's face. The sound of the slap echoed off the buildings. Denise stumbled backward, her hand flying up to her cheek. Pain exploded across the left side of her face, sharp and hot. Her ears rang. For a moment, she couldn't see anything but white. When her vision cleared, she found herself on the ground. She didn't even remember falling. Her palms were scraped from catching herself on the concrete. Her cheek throbbed with every heartbeat. She looked up at the biker, stunned and speechless. He stood over her, his chest heaving, his fists clenched at his sides. There was no remorse in his eyes. No regret, just anger. Pure, blind anger directed at a woman he had never met before. The street had gone silent. The elderly woman with the walker had her hand pressed over her mouth. A man walking his dog had frozen mid-step. Everyone was staring, unable to process what they had just witnessed. Denise tried to speak, but no words came out. Her mind was racing, trying to make sense of what had happened. She had done nothing wrong. She had been polite. She had only asked him to move his bike. And for that he had struck her. The biker glared down at her for another long moment. Then he turned away like she was nothing. Like she wasn't even worth acknowledging. He started walking back toward his motorcycle, reaching for his helmet, but he didn't get far because somewhere across the street, a teenage boy had been filming the whole thing. And within hours, that video would change everything. For a few seconds, nobody moved. The whole street seemed frozen in time, like someone had pressed pause on a movie. Denise was still on the ground, her hand pressed against her burning cheek. The biker was walking toward his motorcycle like nothing had happened. And everyone else just stood there, watching, their brains struggling to catch up with what their eyes had just seen. It was the elderly woman who broke the silence first. Her name was Dorothy, and she had lived in Memphis her entire life. 78 years old, a retired school teacher, and not the kind of person who stayed quiet when something wrong happened right in front of her. "Hey!" she shouted, her voice cracking but fierce. "Hey, you stop right there. You can't just hit a woman and walk away like that." The biker didn't even turn around. He kept walking, reaching for his helmet on the seat of his motorcycle. Dorothy's words meant nothing to him. He was going to leave. He was going to ride off and disappear. And there would be nothing anyone could do about it, but Dorothy wasn't the only one watching. Across the street, a man named Harold had been sitting on a bench, reading his morning newspaper. He was 63 years old, a retired Marine who had served 2 tours overseas before coming home to open a small hardware store. He had seen a lot of things in his life: war, loss, the worst that humanity had to offer. But something about watching this stranger slap an innocent woman in broad daylight made his blood boil in a way he hadn't felt in years. Harold folded his newspaper, set it down on the bench, and stood up. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He just walked across the street with the calm, steady pace of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. The biker had just picked up his helmet when Harold reached him. Without saying a word, Harold reached over and pulled the keys right out of the motorcycle's ignition. The biker spun around, his face twisted with surprise and anger. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he demanded. Harold looked him straight in the eye. He was a full head shorter than the biker and probably 30 pounds lighter. But there was something in his gaze that made the bigger man hesitate. A quiet strength. A refusal to back down. "You're not going anywhere, son," Harold said, his voice low and steady. "Not until the police get here." The biker took a step forward, his fists clenching. "Give me my keys, old man." "I'm warning you." Harold didn't move. He didn't flinch. He just stood there, solid as a rock, blocking the path to the motorcycle. "You want these keys? You're going to have to go through me to get them. And I promise you that's not going to end the way you think it will." For a long moment, the two men stared at each other. The tension in the air was so thick you could almost taste it. The biker was younger, bigger, and clearly used to getting his way through intimidation. But Harold had faced down enemies far more dangerous than some angry man on a sidewalk. He wasn't afraid. Not even a little bit. The biker must have seen something in Harold's eyes because he took a step back. His fists unclenched. He was still angry, but now there was something else there too. Uncertainty, maybe even fear. While this standoff was happening, someone else had already sprung into action. Her name was Rosa, and she worked at the coffee shop. She was 24 years old, the daughter of immigrants who had come to this country with nothing and built a life through hard work and sacrifice. Rosa had learned from her parents that when someone was in trouble, you didn't stand around and watch. You helped. She had seen the whole thing through the window. The moment Denise hit the ground, Rosa grabbed a clean towel from behind the counter, filled it with ice from the machine, and ran outside. She didn't think about whether it was safe. She didn't worry about what the biker might do. She just moved. Rosa knelt down beside Denise and gently pressed the ice against her swollen cheek. "It's okay," she said softly. "I've got you. You're going to be okay." Denise looked up at her, tears streaming down her face. Not from the pain, although that was bad enough, but from the shock. From the overwhelming confusion of being attacked by a complete stranger for no reason at all. "Why?" Denise whispered. "I just asked him to move his bike. That's all I did." Rosa shook her head, her own eyes glistening. I know. Some people are just broken inside. It's not your fault. None of this is your fault." Miss Greta had followed Rosa outside. She was on the phone with 911, her voice urgent but controlled. "Yes, a woman was assaulted on the sidewalk. The man is still here. We need police right away. And maybe an ambulance too." She took a bad hit to the face. The operator asked for the address and Miss Greta gave it. She asked if anyone else was hurt and Miss Greta said no. She asked if the attacker had any weapons and Miss Greta looked over at the biker, who was still standing near his motorcycle, glaring at Harold. "I don't see any weapons," Miss Greta said. But please hurry. I don't know how long this situation is going to stay calm." Meanwhile, something else was happening that nobody on the street realized yet. Across the road, a teenager named Terrence had been filming everything. Terrence was 17 years old, a junior at the local high school. He had been walking to his part-time job at the grocery store when he heard the motorcycles coming down the street. Like a lot of kids his age, his first instinct was to pull out his phone and start recording. He thought he might get a cool video of the bikes to post on social media. Something to get a few likes, maybe some comments from his friends, but then he saw the biker pull onto the sidewalk. He saw the argument, and he saw the slap. Terrence's hands were shaking as he kept filming. He had never witnessed anything like this before. Part of him wanted to put the phone down and run over to help. But another part of him knew that what he was capturing was important. This was evidence. This was proof of what had happened. If the biker tried to lie his way out of this later, there would be a video showing exactly what he did. So Terrence kept recording. He filmed Harold confronting the biker. He filmed Rosa helping Denise. He filmed Miss Greta on the phone with 911. Every second of it. Preserved on his phone, the police arrived 7 minutes later. 2 patrol cars, lights flashing, pulled up to the curb. 4 officers stepped out, their hands resting on their belts as they assessed the situation. Harold pointed at the biker. "That man assaulted this woman. I saw the whole thing. So did everyone else here." Dorothy nodded vigorously from where she stood with her walker. He slapped her right across the face. For no reason at all. She was just asking him to move his motorcycle. The officers approached the biker carefully. One of them asked him to put his hands where they could see them. The biker hesitated, and for a moment it looked like he might try to run. But there was nowhere to go. He was surrounded by witnesses, and his keys were still in Harold's pocket. The biker's shoulders slumped. The fight went out of him. He put his hands up and let the officers approach. Within minutes, he was in handcuffs, being led to the back of one of the patrol cars. An ambulance arrived shortly after. The paramedics checked Denise's face and confirmed that nothing was broken, but she would have a nasty bruise for the next few weeks. They offered to take her to the hospital for a more thorough examination, but she declined. She had spent enough time in hospitals. All she wanted now was to go home, but before she left, something happened that Denise would never forget. One by one, the strangers who had helped her came over to say goodbye. Harold returned the biker's keys to the police and then walked over to shake Denise's hand. Dorothy shuffled up with her walker and gave her a gentle hug. Rosa pressed a fresh cup of coffee into her hands, free of charge. And Terrence, the teenager with the phone, came over with a shy look on his face. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I recorded everything. If you need it for the police or for court or anything, I'll send it to you. What he did was wrong, and I want to make sure he doesn't get away with it." Denise looked at this young man, barely more than a boy, and felt something shift inside her chest. 10 minutes ago, she had been lying on the ground, wondering how the world could be so cruel. But now, standing here surrounded by people who had stepped up to help a complete stranger, she felt something else entirely. Hope. She thanked Terrence and gave him her phone number. She thanked Harold and Dorothy and Rosa and Miss Greta. She thanked the police officers and the paramedics. And then, finally, she walked home, but this was far from over. Because later that night, Terrence would post the video online. And by morning, the whole world would know Denise's name. Terrence sat on the edge of his bed that night, staring at his phone. The video was right there, ready to upload. 2 minutes and 37 seconds of footage that showed everything. The argument. The slap. The woman falling to the ground. The biker walking away like he hadn't just ruined someone's day, maybe even someone's life. His thumb hovered over the post button. He knew that once he shared this, there was no taking it back. The internet had a way of turning small moments into big stories. And this moment, as small as it might seem to some people, felt important. He thought about Denise. The look on her face when she was lying on the ground. The confusion. The pain. The way she had asked why, like she genuinely couldn't understand how another human being could treat her that way. Terrence pressed the button. He added a simple caption. "This happened in Memphis this morning. This woman did nothing wrong. She just asked a man to move his bike, and he did this to her. Please share." Then he put his phone down and went to sleep, figuring maybe a few hundred people would see it. His friends. Some strangers. Maybe it would get a few angry comments and then disappear into the endless scroll of the internet like everything else. He was wrong. By the time he woke up the next morning, the video had been viewed over 50,000 times. By noon, it had crossed 200,000. By evening, it was everywhere. News stations were playing clips of it. Celebrities were sharing it on their pages. The hashtag Justice for Denise was trending across multiple platforms. Denise found out about all of this in the strangest way possible. She had spent the previous day resting at home, an ice pack pressed against her swollen cheek, trying to process what had happened. She had called her mother to let her know she was okay. She had filed a report with the police. She had even managed to eat some soup and watch a little television before falling into a restless sleep. When she woke up the next morning, her phone was going crazy. Notifications were pouring in faster than she could read them. Text messages from friends she hadn't spoken to in years. Missed calls from numbers she didn't recognize. Emails from people whose names meant nothing to her. At first, she thought something was wrong. Maybe there had been an emergency at the hospital. Maybe something had happened to someone in her family. Her heart was pounding as she unlocked her phone and tried to make sense of the chaos. Then she saw the video. She watched it 3 times, unable to look away. It was surreal seeing herself on the screen. The woman in the video looked so small, so vulnerable, and the man, the biker, looked like a monster. Watching him raise his hand and bring it down across her face made her stomach turn. Even though she had lived through it just 24 hours earlier, the comment section was flooded with messages. Thousands upon thousands of people expressing their outrage, their sympathy, their support. This is disgusting. That man should be locked up forever. Who is this woman? Someone start a GoFundMe for her. I hope she presses charges. He can't get away with this. Sending love from California. Stay strong, Queen. Denise didn't know how to feel. Part of her was grateful for the support. It was comforting to know that so many strangers cared about what had happened to her. But another part of her felt exposed, vulnerable, like her worst moment had been put on display for the whole world to see. Her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize, but something told her to answer it. Hello? Hi, is this Denise Carter? The voice on the other end was professional but warm. My name is Angela, and I'm a producer at Channel 5 News here in Memphis. I was hoping I could talk to you about what happened yesterday. Would you be willing to do an interview? Denise hesitated. She had never been on television before. She wasn't sure she wanted to be. But then she thought about all those comments, all those people who were angry on her behalf. Maybe this was a chance to say something, to turn this ugly moment into something meaningful. Okay, she said quietly. I'll do it. The interview was filmed later that afternoon. A news crew came to her apartment, set up their cameras and lights, and sat down across from her. The reporter was a kind woman in her 50s who spoke to Denise like a friend rather than a subject. She asked about what happened, and Denise told the story from beginning to end. The coffee shop, the biker, the simple request that had led to such a violent response, but then the reporter asked a question that caught Denise off guard. Denise, there are a lot of people online calling for harsh punishment for this man. Some are even saying he should never be released from prison. How do you feel about that? Denise was quiet for a long moment. She thought about the biker. The look in his eyes right before he hit her. The rage, the desperation. She thought about all the anger she had seen in the comment section, people calling him names, wishing terrible things upon him. And then she said something that nobody expected. I'm hurt, she admitted, her voice steady but soft. What he did to me was wrong? There's no excuse for it. And I do want him to face consequences for his actions. But I'm not interested in revenge. I'm more interested in why. What's happening in someone's life that they lash out like that at a complete stranger? What kind of pain is someone carrying that makes them capable of something like this? The reporter looked surprised. So you're saying you feel sympathy for him? I'm saying I feel curious, Denise replied. I've been a nurse for 12 years. I've seen people at their worst. People in pain. People who are scared. People who don't know how to ask for help. And sometimes that pain comes out in ugly ways. I'm not excusing what he did, but I refuse to believe that anyone is just born evil. Something happened to make him this way. And until we start asking those questions, we're never going to fix anything. The interview aired that night on the evening news. Within hours, clips of Denise's response were being shared just as widely as the original video. But now, the conversation was shifting. People weren't just angry anymore. They were curious. Who was this man? What had driven him to such a violent act? Journalists started digging. It didn't take long for the details to emerge. The biker's name was Craig Dutton. He was 41 years old. He had worked as a mechanic at a local auto shop for 15 years before being laid off 6 months earlier. His wife had filed for divorce around the same time, and he had lost custody of his 2 children. Court records showed that he had been ordered to attend anger management classes years ago after a road rage incident. But there was no evidence that he had ever completed them. There were also medical records that painted an even more complicated picture. Craig had been diagnosed with depression and anxiety in his 20s. He had been prescribed medication but had stopped taking it years ago. Friends who were willing to speak anonymously said he had been spiraling for months. Drinking too much, pushing people away, talking about how the world was against him. None of this excused what he had done. Everyone agreed on that. But it added layers to a story that could have been simple. Villain and victim, monster and innocent. The truth, as it so often is, was messier than that. Denise watched the news coverage from her couch, the ice pack still pressed against her cheek. She saw pictures of Craig Dutton, saw the timeline of his unraveling, saw the experts talking about mental health and the systems that fail people every day. She didn't feel sorry for him. Exactly. But she didn't feel hate either. What she felt was something harder to name. A sadness, maybe. A recognition that the world was full of broken people, and that broken people sometimes broke others. Her phone buzzed with another notification. Another message of support. Another stranger telling her she was brave. Denise set the phone down and closed her eyes. She didn't feel brave. She just felt tired. Tired and confused and uncertain about what was supposed to come next. But deep down, she knew this wasn't over. The video had started something. Her words had started something. And whatever came next, she had a feeling it was going to change her life forever. 3 weeks had passed since the incident on the sidewalk. The bruise on Denise's cheek had faded from purple to yellow to nothing at all. The swelling was gone. The physical pain had disappeared. But the memory of that morning stayed with her, playing on a loop in her mind at the strangest moments. When she was brushing her teeth, when she was driving to work, when she was trying to fall asleep at night, the world had mostly moved on. That was how these things worked. A story would explode across the internet. Everyone would have their opinions for a few days, and then something new would come along to capture their attention. The hashtag Justice for Denise had stopped trending. The interview requests had slowed down. Life was returning to normal, or at least something close to it. Craig Dutton was still in jail, awaiting trial. His lawyer had requested bail, but the judge had denied it, citing the violent nature of the assault and Craig's history of anger issues. Denise had received updates from the prosecutor's office, formal letters explaining the charges and the timeline of the case. She read each one carefully and then filed them away in a folder she kept in her desk drawer. She didn't know how she was supposed to feel about any of it. Part of her wanted the trial to be over so she could stop thinking about Craig Dutton entirely. Another part of her felt strangely unsettled, like there was unfinished business she couldn't quite name. Then, one afternoon, she received a phone call that changed everything. It was from a woman named Patricia, who worked at a victims advocacy organization in downtown Memphis. Her voice was gentle and professional as she introduced herself and explained why she was calling. Denise, I want to start by saying that you're under no obligation to do anything I'm about to ask, Patricia said. But I've been contacted by someone who would very much like to speak with you, if you're willing. Denise felt her stomach tighten. Who? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Craig Dutton's mother. Her name is Beverly. She reached out to our organization last week, asking if there was any way she could apologize to you. Not on her son's behalf, exactly. She knows she can't do that. But she wanted to express her own sorrow for what happened. She's devastated, Denise. She's been crying every day since she saw the video. Denise didn't say anything. She couldn't. Her mind was racing in 100 different directions at once. Patricia continued. I want to be very clear. You don't have to do this. Many victims choose not to have any contact with the families of the people who hurt them, and that's completely understandable. But I also know that you said some things in your interview that suggested you might be open to understanding what happened. So I wanted to at least give you the option. Denise sat down on the edge of her bed. Her hands were trembling slightly. She thought about Beverly Dutton, a woman she had never met. A woman whose son had struck her across the face for no reason. What would it be like to sit across from her? What would they even say to each other? "Can I think about it?" Denise asked. "Of course," Patricia replied. "Take all the time you need. There's no pressure either way." Denise hung up the phone and stared at the wall for a long time. She thought about her mother, about how devastated she would be if Denise ever did something terrible. She thought about all the times she had seen families in the hospital, sitting in waiting rooms, praying for loved ones who had made bad choices. Mothers who still loved their children even when those children had done unforgivable things. She thought about Craig Dutton, sitting in a jail cell somewhere waiting to learn his fate. And she thought about his mother, probably sitting in her own living room, wondering how her son had ended up this way. Wondering if there was anything she could have done differently. 2 days later, Denise called Patricia back. "I'll meet with her," she said. "I don't know what I'm going to say, but I'll meet with her." The meeting was arranged for the following Saturday at a small community center on the east side of town. Patricia would be there to facilitate, to make sure both women felt safe and supported. Denise arrived early, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She sat in a plastic chair in a plain room with beige walls and fluorescent lights, waiting. Beverly Dutton arrived 10 minutes later. She was a small woman in her late 60s, with gray hair pulled back in a neat bun and deep lines etched into her face. Her eyes were red and puffy, like she had been crying recently. Maybe she had been crying all morning. Maybe she hadn't stopped crying in weeks. She walked into the room slowly, like she was afraid of taking up too much space. When she saw Denise, she stopped. Her lower lip trembled. For a moment, it looked like she might turn around and leave, but she didn't. She took a deep breath, walked over to the chair across from Denise, and sat down. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was heavy, filled with all the things that needed to be said but didn't have words yet. Finally, Beverly spoke. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to do this," she said. "I've been practicing what I wanted to say for days, but now that I'm here, none of it seems right. Nothing I say is going to fix what my son did to you. Nothing is going to take away that pain." Denise watched her carefully. She could see the shame in Beverly's eyes. The guilt. This woman was carrying a weight that Denise couldn't even imagine. "I'm not here for an apology," Denise said quietly. "I mean, I'll accept one if you want to give it. But that's not why I came." Beverly looked up, surprised. "Then why did you come?" Denise thought about it for a moment. "I guess I wanted to understand. I've been asking myself why this happened to me. Why your son did what he did. I thought maybe if I talked to you I might find some answers." Beverly's eyes filled with fresh tears. She reached into her purse and pulled out a crumpled tissue, dabbing at her face. "Craig wasn't always like this," she said, her voice breaking. "When he was a little boy, he was the sweetest child you ever saw. Always bringing home stray animals. Always wanting to help people. He used to tell me he wanted to be a firefighter when he grew up. He wanted to save lives." She paused, struggling to compose herself. But something changed when he got older. He started getting angry all the time. Little things would set him off. He got in fights at school. He lost friends. I tried to get him help, but he wouldn't listen. He said he didn't need therapy. He said he could handle it on his own." Denise listened without interrupting. She could hear the pain in Beverly's voice, the years of worry and frustration and helplessness. "When he lost his job, it got worse," Beverly continued. "Then his wife left him and took the kids. He called me one night, crying, saying he didn't know how to keep going. I begged him to see a doctor. I begged him to let me help, but he just kept pushing me away. He kept saying he was fine, even when it was obvious he wasn't." She looked directly at Denise, her eyes raw with grief. "I'm not telling you this to make excuses for him. What he did to you was evil. There's no other word for it. But I need you to know that the man in that video, that's not the son I raised. That's what happens when someone falls apart and nobody catches them." Denise felt something shift inside her chest. She had expected to feel anger sitting across from this woman. She had expected to feel resentment, maybe even disgust. But what she actually felt was something closer to sadness. A deep, aching sadness for everyone involved in this tragedy. She reached across the table and took Beverly's hands in her own. The older woman looked up at her, shocked. "Your son is responsible for what he did," Denise said softly. "He made a choice that morning, and he has to face the consequences of that choice. But you are not your son? You didn't hit me. You didn't make those decisions. And I refuse to let hate be the only thing that comes out of this." Beverly broke down completely. She sobbed into her hands, her whole body shaking with the force of her tears. Denise held on to her, saying nothing, just letting her cry. They stayed like that for a long time. Two strangers, connected by the worst moment of both their lives, finding something unexpected in that small, plain room. Not forgiveness, exactly. It was too soon for that, but maybe the beginning of something. A crack in the wall of pain that separated them. A reminder that even in the darkest moments, there was still room for grace. The trial lasted 3 days. Denise sat in the courtroom for every minute of it, watching as lawyers argued back and forth about what had happened that morning outside the coffee shop. The video was played multiple times. Witnesses testified. Experts talked about anger and impulse control and the failures of the mental health system. Craig Dutton sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit, his head bowed most of the time. He looked smaller than Denise remembered, older. The rage that had burned in his eyes that morning was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like emptiness. He never looked at her. Not once during the entire trial. On the third day, Craig stood before the judge to enter his plea. His lawyer had advised him to plead not guilty, to fight the charges and hope for a sympathetic jury. But Craig had refused. He said he was tired of running from what he had done. He said he wanted to take responsibility. "Guilty, Your Honor," he said, his voice barely audible in the quiet courtroom. The judge nodded and scheduled the sentencing for 2 weeks later. During those 2 weeks, something unexpected happened. The prosecutor's office reached out to Denise and asked if she would be willing to participate in something called a victim impact statement. It was a chance for her to address the court directly, to explain how the assault had affected her life. The judge would consider her words when deciding Craig's sentence. Denise agreed. She spent days working on what she wanted to say. She wrote draft after draft, throwing each one away because nothing felt right. She didn't want to sound angry, even though part of her still was. She didn't want to sound weak, even though some nights she still woke up in a cold sweat, dreaming about that hand coming toward her face. In the end, she decided to speak from the heart without a script. She would stand in front of the court and say whatever came to her in that moment. The day of the sentencing arrived. The courtroom was packed. Reporters filled the back rows, their cameras waiting outside. Denise's mother sat behind her, holding her hand until the very last second. Beverly Dutton was there too, sitting on the opposite side of the room, her face pale and drawn. When it was time for the victim impact statement, Denise walked to the front of the courtroom. Her legs felt unsteady, but she forced herself to keep moving. She stood at the podium and looked out at all the faces watching her. Then she turned and looked at Craig Dutton. Their eyes met for the first time since that morning on the sidewalk. "I've thought a lot about what I wanted to say today," Denise began, her voice steady but soft. "I've thought about all the ways my life has changed since you hit me. The nightmares, the anxiety, the way I flinch now when someone raises their hand too fast, even if they're just waving hello." She paused, collecting herself. "But I've also thought about you, about who you were before that morning, about the little boy who wanted to be a firefighter, about the man who lost his job and his family and didn't know how to ask for help. I'm not saying any of that excuses what you did. It doesn't, but I've learned that understanding and excusing are two different things." Craig's eyes were wet. He was crying silently, tears streaming down his face. "I could stand here and ask the judge to lock you away forever," Denise continued. "Part of me wants that. Part of me is still so angry I can barely breathe. But another part of me knows that wouldn't fix anything. It wouldn't undo what happened. It wouldn't make me feel whole again. And it wouldn't give you a chance to become someone better." She took a deep breath. So instead, I'm asking for something different. I'm asking that whatever sentence you receive includes real help, real treatment, a chance to understand why you did what you did and to make sure you never do it again. Not for your sake, but for the sake of the next person who might cross your path on a bad day. They deserve to be safe. And the only way to make them safe is to help you heal. She stepped back from the podium. The courtroom was completely silent. Even the reporters had stopped scribbling in their notebooks. The judge thanked Denise for her statement and then took a few minutes to review his notes. When he finally spoke, his voice was solemn. Mr. Dutton, you have pleaded guilty to assault. This was a violent, unprovoked attack on an innocent woman. There is no excuse for your behavior, and you must face consequences for your actions. Craig nodded, his head still bowed. However, the judge continued, I have also heard Miss Carter's statement, and I have reviewed the reports about your mental health history. It is clear that you are a man in crisis, a man who fell through the cracks of a system that should have helped you long before things reached this point. He paused. I am sentencing you to 18 months in prison, followed by 2 years of supervised probation. During your incarceration, you will be required to complete a mental health treatment program and an anger management course. Upon your release, you will continue therapy as a condition of your probation. If you violate any of these terms, you will return to prison to serve the remainder of your sentence. Craig looked up at the judge. Thank you, Your Honor, he whispered. I won't waste this chance. The trial was over. The reporters rushed outside to file their stories. The courtroom slowly emptied. But Denise stayed in her seat for a long time. Staring at the empty space where Craig had been sitting, her mother squeezed her shoulder. I'm proud of you, she said softly. What you did up there took more courage than I can imagine. Denise smiled weakly. I don't feel courageous. I just feel tired. But something had changed inside her. A weight she had been carrying for months felt a little lighter. Not gone, but lighter. In the weeks that followed, Denise made a decision. She couldn't go back to her old life and pretend none of this had happened. The experience had changed her too much. She needed to do something with it. Something meaningful. She started small. She reached out to Patricia at the Victims Advocacy Organization and asked how she could help. She began volunteering on weekends, talking to other people who had been through traumatic experiences, sharing her story and listening to theirs. Then she went bigger. With the help of some friends and a small grant from a local foundation, she founded a nonprofit organization. She called it Second Chance Conversations. The mission was simple: to bring together victims and offenders in safe, supervised settings, giving both sides a chance to heal through honest dialogue. It wasn't easy. Many victims wanted nothing to do with the people who had hurt them, and Denise understood that completely. She never pressured anyone. But for those who were ready, the conversations could be transformative. She watched people who had been consumed by anger find peace. She watched people who had done terrible things finally understand the pain they had caused. Harold, the retired Marine who had stopped Craig that morning, became one of her first volunteers. So did Rosa from the coffee shop. Even Terrence, the teenager who had filmed the video, started helping out after he graduated from high school. They became a little family, bound together by that single moment on a Memphis sidewalk. 2 years after the trial, Denise received a letter. It came from a state prison about 50 miles outside the city. The handwriting on the envelope was shaky. Like the person who wrote it wasn't used to holding a pen, she opened it slowly. The letter was from Craig Dutton. He had completed his sentence and his treatment program. He was about to be released. The letter wasn't long, just a few paragraphs. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't make excuses. He simply wanted her to know that he thought about what he had done every single day, that her words in the courtroom had saved his life, that he was going to spend the rest of his years trying to be worthy of the second chance. She had asked the judge to give him. Denise read the letter 3 times. Then she folded it carefully and put it in her desk drawer, right next to the folder with all the court documents. She didn't write back. She wasn't ready for that. Maybe she never would be, but she kept the letter. And sometimes on hard days, she would take it out and read it again. Not because she had forgiven Craig Dutton. Forgiveness was complicated, and she wasn't sure she would ever fully get there. She kept it because it reminded her of something important. That people could change. That broken things could be mended. That even the worst moments of our lives could become the foundation for something beautiful, and that was enough. For now, that was enough.